You know, gentrification is one of those things that a lot of folks in our society believe is just this inevitable thing. And it's like, it's the tide. You know, maybe you built this amazing sandcastle, but it's inevitable that it's going to be destroyed by this tide, you know. And that, of course, is just not true.
The city of Atlanta is being gentrified, and it didn't just start with our block.
They don't care about people, they care about development.
Why are you displacing the residents that's already here?
Anytime you stand up for what you believe in and stand for what's right, prepare yourself for a fight.
Parks and ponds and amenities like this one, green spaces are being used to replace black faces.
Atlanta, nicknamed the Black Mecca for its once majority black population and the economic opportunities it offered for its black residents. It's also known as the city too busy to hate due to its rich civil rights history. Today, it's one of the highest cities in the nation for income inequality, and yet it continues to grow at a rapid pace. And with rapid growth comes changes that some call gentrification.
Gentrification is a process that almost every major city is seeing. It's a word that evokes powerful emotion. But what exactly is gentrification? Some people use it as a word meaning the revitalization of an area. Others use it as a word meaning the displacement of poor residents, oftentimes residents of color. With Atlanta developing at a rapid pace, now is a more important time than ever to understand how gentrification is affecting the city. Join me as we talk to leaders and residents alike to understand the changes beneath the skyline.
We start with Peoplestown, a legacy neighborhood founded in the 1880s, where a block is now fighting what they call gentrification under the guise of eminent domain.
When I grew up here, it was much like it is now, but filled with folks, working class communities, mostly black folks. My grandparents lived just a couple of hundred meters right here. Always a very robust neighborhood, very community-oriented, family-oriented, very loving but thriving community.
It was a safe environment because they were your neighbors. A lot of people that worked in the community lived in the community.
We used to come to a place, a gathering, every Saturday to talk about community issues, what's happening in communities, and that has become so divided in terms of, and it mirrors what is happening in the neighborhood. You don't know your neighbors. You know, these are people that, you know, they want to be in the city, they want to be, but they don't want to be a part of the community, and they don't want to be a part of the existing community.
There was a flood in 2012, and it was about 6 houses that flooded. The city drain, it blew, and that's what caused the flood. And they came out and said that they was going to clean up everything, whatever damages, but that didn't happen.
Then Mayor Kasim Reed came to this neighborhood and he met with the residents and told us all that there would be a short-term and long-term solution, but he confirmed that no one would have to move.
We asked him point blank, will we have to move out of our homes? Will we be displaced? No, ma'am. You see how far I'm sitting from you is how far he was sitting from me. During that time, we got estimates on what the damages was. In order for us to move forward, we had to get a lawyer to present, you know, our case to the city so that they would, you know, do what they said it was going to do.
Some of the neighbors whose homes flooded and whose property was damaged as a result of the flood brought a lawsuit against the city, and that was maybe 9 or 10 of the 27 residents who lived on this block. My home didn't flood. It hasn't flooded in the 100 years that it's been here, nor did the homes of many of my neighbors on the upside of the hill of this block. And so we weren't part of the lawsuit, but we heard that in the settlement negotiations, the city attorneys expressed an intention to take the entire block of homes.
We get a letter from the city wanting to buy our houses. Did you hear what I said? Now, you just told me we're not gonna have to move out of our house, but now you're gonna wanna buy my house? For what reason?
My family, the Dardens, who are now my next door neighbors, Mr. Dwayne Adgar and Miss Maddie Jackson, who unfortunately passed away last August. We all decided we did not want to accept the city's offer. We loved this neighborhood. Miss Maddie had lived in her home over 50 years, carried the torch in the Olympics, and she wanted to stay in her home.
We responded saying that we didn't want to sell our house. Then the next thing, the whole block, everybody on the block, they got a letter stating that the city want to buy the whole block.
So they told them either you accept the offers that we make or you're going to lose your home pursuant to eminent domain.
You said that you was working on a short-term and a long-term plan to fix the problem. So why not fix the problem? We refused several offers to buy our house. And then the last letter we got stated that if we didn't sell, then they would be forced to take it by eminent domain. In other words,
many of my neighbors decided, against the backdrop of the threat of eminent domain, to settle with the city. I encouraged them to get their own appraisals because what the city was offering was not consistent with what the appraisal values of the homes were when they had independent appraisals done.
But the Dardens had no intention of leaving the home they'd known for over 30 years.
I voted for you when you was mayor. And then for your administration to come in our community to force families out of their homes by using eminent domain. And then come to find out, after we went to court, they withheld evidence that we could have used to resolve it, but then sent the documents after the city ruled in favor of taking our home. Took a name off the deeds to our home. And here we are, seniors. Where we gonna live? Why we got to move out of our house when you said that you were gonna fix the problem and we didn't have to move and we didn't have to be displaced?
In the course of our protesting, Mayor Reed made the decision that Miss Maddie could stay. We were overjoyed for her, right? Because at that point she was 94 years old. And you don't move an old person's toothbrush, let alone the house that they've lived in for 50 years and raised their family. And everything that she's given to the community, she didn't deserve to have to spend her last years fighting. We decided that we were going to ask the mayor to please grant us the same exemption that he granted Miss Maddie. He said no. The city council passed an ordinance authorizing the taking of our homes. It passed 12-0, and they took our houses. They took our names off of the deed. So on the deed for all of our houses, it says City of Atlanta. And we were still paying the mortgage. And we live here, but the city holds legal title to all of our homes.
They said that they was gonna put a park and a pond. In 2013, this is when they said they was gonna do this to stop the flooding. The head project manager, she was asking them, where's the modeling? If you're gonna put a park and a pond there, where's the modeling? Because according to the data, you have enough storage space to catch the runoff before it get downstream. Where's the modeling? To me, that's like a blueprint. If you're gonna build something, a park and a pond, present it. And she did not ask just one time, but several emails that she asked for that.
Similar retention ponds have been implemented in flood-prone areas around Atlanta, two of the most notable being Old Fourth Ward Park and Cook Park in Vine City on the west side.
And what we kept asking them for in court was, where's your modeling? Where's the data that shows that you need this block? Not the designs, not the pictures, but the engineering modeling. Instead of providing her with that information, they fired her. And a month later, that's when the ordinance was introduced, authorizing the mayor to take our homes by eminent domain.
We got a letter from the city lawyers suing us for the taking of our home by condemnation / eminent domain. When we went to court, our lawyers asked the city engineer for a copy so that our engineers can look at modeling to see, was it needful to take all the houses or take our house, You know what the next thing happened? The judge ruled in favor of the city taking our house. After that, they turned over thousands of documents.
In the course of litigation, we discovered documentation from a city engineer, Kim Palmer, now Kim Scott. She was the project manager for this proposed park and pond. And she, back in 2013, wrote emails to the former commissioner of the Department of Watershed, who has since been indicted. She wrote emails to her saying, you don't need this property. We only needed 2 or 3 houses. We didn't need 27. We've been in court fighting them, and I'm glad that we did because we discovered concrete evidence. What I tell my law students they will never find, which is the smoking gun, the needle in the haystack, we found it.
It's been proven that the city didn't need this block. They didn't need it. They just wanted us to be gone. They have I say hidden, but I'm gonna use the proper word, another agenda.
That engineer went to court and testified that she had alerted them to the fact that they did not need all of this property to address the flooding and to build this park that they said they needed to build, which was a Japanese-themed walking style park. And it has changed now to a park that looks completely different.
My name is Kimberly Scott, formerly Palmer. I am a West End Historic District resident as well as a former City of Atlanta employee. I am the engineering project manager that during the discovery period, the emails actually sparked a re-review of this case. When we were working on the project, it included taking care of the principal homes that experienced some severe flooding during that time. And we did not have sufficient engineering data from our engineering consultants to go from 3 to 4 homes where you had the severe flooding to displacing an entire block. I was raised professionally by African American engineer that taught me to design with a moral compass. When you design as if you live there. You design as if this is impacting your neighborhood, your street. Engineering work can be very political, as well as where you are told not to put things in writing. This is a time for you to right or wrong. This is a time for you to look at this and say, at that time, we did not have sufficient data to move forward with condemnation legislation that would displace an entire block. This is the time for you to reconsider the engineering data that has been provided right now and look at a redesign that will keep these residents in their homes, as well as, and I would like to add, to not undermine the structural integrity of their homes. So I'm asking the city once again, and I'm appealing to my fellow colleagues, those that have worked with me in the community as well as the City Hall, to reconsider this legislation, keep these people in their homes, as well as to look at the redesign and make sure that it's a win-win for everybody. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
When I talked to other organizations that do work around eminent domain, what I discovered is that parks and ponds and amenities like this one, green spaces, are being used to replace black faces. People are using infrastructure as a justification for displacement and for facilitating gentrification.
What's been called lately environmental gentrification or green gentrification, and this concept is when you create especially very large green amenities, things like large parks, especially linear parks, it turns out, which the BeltLine is essentially a linear park. Because a linear park, think about it, has lots of space right outside of it, right? Whereas if you just build a big round park, you only have so much space. But if you build a circle you've got at least twice as much space to develop right around it. These large parks can be drivers of gentrification.
When you put a $65 million gentrification park in the middle of a neighborhood, you expect to attract a certain demographic. In fact, that's why you put it there. People move, right? That's part of human migration patterns are normal. What concerns me is when the government identifies, along with private developers, areas that they want to develop, and they start to take action that clears the way for new residents. What the city has offered me in terms of buying my property is not even enough for me to buy the $650,000 house across the street. I can't move across the street with what they've offered me. When I moved here 10 years ago, this was already a place. I didn't try to change it. I was grateful for the space that it was. I joined the organizations that were here and got to know my neighbors. I didn't move in trying to make it something other than Peoplestown. Now there are 5 houses left of the 27 families that were there. I would go to work, come home, a house would be gone. Or I would wake up to the sound of equipment crashing into a house. It's quite violent and disorienting. I think that was intentionally done by the city. They didn't tell us when they were bringing a house down. It was part of their intimidation tactic to get us to move.
Every time you leave, you don't know if you come back, your house is bulldozed. Everybody moved to the outskirts, Alpharetta, everything, children all grown. You want to move back to the city. But when you left the city, a lot of resources left the city. You left us high and dry.
Now the truth is out. They didn't need this block. Why would we go? We already know now that they didn't need it then and don't need it now. They just want us gone. I ain't going nowhere. I'm not doing it to keep their money.
The leadership that allows this to happen is shameful. They don't care about community and neighborhoods. They don't care about legacy. They simply care about attracting new residents into a neighborhood. That's it.
I was able to raise my family in that house where we is now. We're not planning on moving unless God says so. We'll fight, and then we'll fight some more. It's no big deal as far as how long we have to stay in the fight. Anytime you stand up for what you believe in and stand for what's right, prepare yourself for a fight.
I'm very disappointed that Mayor Bottoms, who was a city council member who voted for the ordinance, by the way, when she inherited this problem, I'm disappointed that she did not resolve it. This is prime property. I mean, we're in proximity to all of the major highways. In fact, the first time this neighborhood was decimated, it was the highways coming straight through and displacing people. And then we had the Fulton County Stadium, and then we had Turner Field, and then we had the Olympics, and then we had the parking lots that displaced thousands of residents. So the cycle that one of my neighbors, Allison Johnson, talked about of abuse and exploitation has continued.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's good to be on the right side of the right things. Amen to that? Amen. We are here standing with you once again. Last week, we were standing with you on City Hall steps. We were saying that this must end the right way. We have to go back to the drawing board with engineering and be able to figure out a way to preserve these homes and get this project still done. We do need water retention. We do need that, but we also don't need to displace anybody. We gotta sit back down with these families. You gotta sit back down with these families. We're talking about let this eviction go away and let a new administration, whoever it may be, let the next administration deal with this, but don't evict anybody in November or December or anytime. And in 2019, that ordinance that we put together, it was Michael Julian Bond and myself. It was the ordinance number 19-0-15-18, an ordinance by council members Michael Julian Bond and Andre Dickens. as substituted by the Utilities Committee, requesting that the City of Atlanta's Law Department to withdraw all condemnation actions by the City of Atlanta against Mr. and Mrs. Robert Darden, Mr. Dwayne Adgar, and Mrs. Tanya Washington to repeal the Ordinance 14-01471 in its entirety, to initiate the return of legal title of certain parcels to the prior property owners and for other purposes. That was 2019, before the pandemic hit. I stand here today, standing with you all. I'm glad that you are continuing to keep up the fight. And I thank you all for all that you've done to continue to drive this point home, that in Atlanta, we gotta make sure that we, make sure we look out for our seniors and our legacy residents, because what a horrible precedent this will set for anybody else that wanna remain in their homes. So let's keep moving, everybody.
Which brings us to Summerhill, a neighborhood like Peoplestown that has seen rapid development in recent years. Development that has brought mixed feelings from its legacy residents.
5 years ago, just vacant, underutilized lots, not too much activity, and now it's thriving. There are people left and right. Businesses are being supported and patronized by not only Summerhill residents, but Atlanta residents who want to come and eat and hang out and just enjoy a nice hot day like today. But it's been a lot of development activity, a lot of changes.
My name is Donovan Barnes. I was a resident of Summerhill for 2 years. I see that they're adding grocery stores to the area. That's something that people of that community were asking for years. But I see that now that Georgia State's came in and entered into the development game, now they're getting a Publix to that area. Or now that Georgia State's gone ahead and added their facilities to that area, now you're seeing more development. I think that those shops are kind of tailored toward the demographics of people that they would like to be in that area as well. So one positive thing I would say is they started doing things with the abandoned lots, but also they're adding luxury apartments is what the changes that they're making to it. You know, they're replacing those lots with luxury apartments, luxury townhouses, just expensive pieces of property when the property wasn't that expensive to begin with. They added those townhouses and apartments, and then the property value just skyrocketed. So I would say the biggest change is the prices of the homes and the demographic of people that they're trying to attract and have attracted to the neighborhood. I definitely foresee neglect of the former residents going to happen. I know that a lot of developers now are claiming that they're gonna try to have the mixed income neighborhood, and that's something that's being proposed. Personally, I haven't seen much evidence of it. Every new property that's gone up in that area, when you do the research, they're high priced, and they're out of the price range of the people that lived in that community. People that lived in that area previously are not able to afford that. So it's pretty clear that they're trying to bring in a completely new demographic of people, whether that be based on income, whether that be based on just different things. I definitely agree with the fact that a lot of the people that are now moving into this community have no idea of the community's history with it. They're just appreciative of the shops and things that are there presently without acknowledging what was there previously. Looking at these townhomes, I don't believe I would have seen those, especially at that time, just with the income of the people in that neighborhood and the attention that the city showed to the neighborhood. I personally don't see those townhouses being built around that time. I couldn't have predicted that. I would definitely say it's something I wouldn't have imagined.
Summerhill and the legacy of Summerhill is one that has experienced a ton of changes and additions, but it's also experienced a lot of just removal as well. You have the highway systems that pretty much obliterated the community, and there's been a lot of neglect that the community as a whole has experienced. And so I think you have neighbors who see the change as something, a sign of good things to come, a sign of recognition, a sign of being seen and valued. And you have other neighbors who are afraid of that change. And is this neighborhood going to belong to us? Is this neighborhood going to keep in mind our interests and the quality of life that residents who have lived here in Summerhill and called Summerhill home for decades have in their heads and hearts? Development has a stigma, particularly in predominantly Black legacy communities here in Atlanta, of coming in and having their ideas and just steamrolling ahead without any concern or consideration of the people who call that neighborhood home. Not even getting to the fact that will the people here be able to benefit from those changes that are happening. And so you have some folks who are weary of development in general. By and large, I think the response that I've received in the few years that I've called Summerhill home outside of working here has been positive. Housing is tricky, and I think some of the larger projects, we've had many conversations about community benefit agreements and being able to be intentional about setting aside low-income housing units so that folks who live here can stay here, or folks who can afford those increasingly high rents who want to live in Summerhill can live in Summerhill. This is an old historic neighborhood. It might not have the designation of historic Summerhill, but many residents and neighbors of mine view it as such. It's been a net positive. And so you take the good with the bad. Again, I think change is difficult. You have a predominantly Black community that is diversifying overnight. You have old Black legacy residents who are now welcoming into their home, a place that has been their home for decades and has looked very different than it looks today. And that can be hard. And I've had some candid, frank conversations with neighbors about those changes. I have to literally get my boots on the ground and meet all residents where they are, have conversations, make sure it's not just me, but the rest of the organizational board is reflective and representative of who we are and who we want to be. Here we are in 2021, and you look over there and you see, tractors moving dirt around, and we're finally going to get a grocery store that to many neighborhoods would not seem like a big deal, but to us it's everything, because it's not just food, it's not just amenities, it's recognition, it's placing a value on this neighborhood and the people who call Summerhill home, and sometimes that matters more than the physical resource itself.
But not all catalysts of change look the same. In fact, one has been celebrated as one of the most innovative things to come out of Atlanta in a long time and has brought new energy all over. Enter the Atlanta BeltLine. The BeltLine is essentially a large sidewalk that wraps around the city and can draw comparisons to New York City's High Line, which has also seen stark economic change in the areas around it. The BeltLine is perhaps one of the best examples that, undoubtedly, brings investment to a neighborhood. At the same time, property values increase around it and change the makeup of a neighborhood.
It's just about everywhere, but obviously the BeltLine has been this ruthless engine of economic development. The BeltLine is the brainchild of Ryan Gravel. He created it as his master's thesis at Georgia Tech, I think in the early 2000s. And the idea was that we were going to repurpose this loop of railroad that wraps 22 miles around the city into this multi-use corridor that would be equal parts. I think the buzz term was always trees, trails, and transit. So the idea was you could walk or bike or scoot or skateboard or whatever anywhere around town. Connects dozens of neighborhoods. The most popular and bustling is not arguably the East Side Trail, which is right over there. It just snakes through, I think, Old Fourth Ward, Inman Park, all the way up to Midtown. Part of the BeltLine hits Reynoldstown, comes through some of Cabbagetown, and it has just indiscriminately transformed all of these neighborhoods in ways that spur economic development, but also has prompted severe displacement.
Newspaper stories began to cover the BeltLine. Property values near the BeltLine started going up, and the relationship was pretty strong. We published a paper in 2007 noticing this, and then the crash hit.
In the last 10 years, we've seen a huge escalation in luxury development in Atlanta. Since the last housing crash, it really hit Atlanta in 2005, and we really felt it from 2005 to like 2011, 12, where we lost just a ton of low-income homeowners.
And everything kind of, values came down everywhere. And then around 2012, 2013, the market started reviving in Atlanta, especially the apartment building market, but also investment and what I would call early stages of gentrification after the crisis.
We have seen that about 90% of everything developed since then has been in a luxury bracket. While at the same time, every year since then, right, we're talking 2010, every year since then, we have lost 5% of our affordable housing every year.
And what I noticed again was there seemed to be a premium on properties near the BeltLine. And in fact, within a year or two of that, you would notice when you went to multiple listing service to real estate websites that they would often, in their search criteria, they would have a box that would say near the BeltLine. And that was pretty much a strong signal to me that this wasn't just any small park or any small amenity that was drawing people to a neighborhood, which might be fine, but that this was starting to drive the real estate market, that it was becoming an engine of both speculation and gentrification.
So I used to live on the BeltLine at this place called the Sampson Street Loft. And when I moved there, I think in 2014, I was renting a 3-bedroom for $1,500 a month. Now my unit is, I believe, a law firm that rents for about $3,500 a month. And so, it's just one example out of thousands of how bringing the BeltLine into an area can inspire developers to bring what a lot of people see as these kind of bougie establishments, luxury residences, little bite-sized pieces of affordable housing too. And all of a sudden property values skyrocket, property taxes skyrocket, and people who, might have known these neighborhoods for decades, all of a sudden can't recognize them anymore. Atlanta is, I think, still the income inequality capital of the country. Like, we have this drastic wealth gap. The richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor are like so different in terms of household income. It's great to have bustling business in any thriving city, but at what cost? There's going to be people who feel the negative side effects of that, and I think that is what a lot of people nod to as gentrification.
A lot of the buildings that you see popping up around it are you might see breweries or coffee shops or yoga places. Those identify with, in many ways, a very dominant, hegemonic one culture. We can ask ourselves, are we even in our revitalization efforts making a space for other cultures to have businesses along the Atlanta BeltLine?
In 2016, my graduate student and I kind of redid the work that I had done in 2007, except looking at this later period. And sure enough, we found even stronger, basically patterns of property increases right within a half mile of the BeltLine that weren't occurring farther away from the BeltLine. And that really, and it was a big difference. Prices over that short period of time increased in the whole city quite a bit, right? Because they're coming from quite low levels to higher levels. And the citywide appreciation outside the BeltLine was on the order of about 30% over that 4-year period. So hefty appreciation. But near the BeltLine, especially on the southwest side of the BeltLine, where the appreciation difference was the greatest, and which is generally low income neighborhoods. We saw the appreciation rate of those neighborhoods near the BeltLine being well over 50% over that period of time, almost doubling. It's not just an inadvertent consequence. If you read the early documents on the BeltLine, the arguments were, we're going to add value to the city. And what they meant was real estate value.
I think the BeltLine is a ruse. Even if we look at it as it is right now, I mean, if you and I walked out right now, you see it's a ruse. It's more developed on this side of town, downtown area, in majority white neighborhoods. There's a BeltLine stream that runs near the Atlanta University Center. Nothing. There's no new development. And any development there is minimal at best. And so many people in that part of town I know of, they were so excited. The BeltLine's going to stretch this way. Theoretically, yeah, there will be a bike path. There will be a walking path, but there's nothing equivalent to, I don't know, Ponce City. Whoa, where's that? What about Whole Foods? What about Publix? What I'm saying is, no, it's an illegitimate, very fake or feigned way of creating parity or equity. And it's not equitable. You don't have the same facilities and amenities. So what they've done is they created a path for walking, running, and biking. That's it.
Ponce City Market wouldn't have happened without the BeltLine. It was this gigantic, hulking beast of a building. It was one of the largest buildings in the southeastern United States, mostly abandoned. My name is Ryan Gravel, urban designer here in Atlanta. The attention that it's gotten and the rents that people pay there, and I mean, it's pretty impressive to see what's happening. Now you see new construction of new office buildings and all over the place. The Atlanta BeltLine started as my graduate thesis 21 years ago. Never imagined we would actually build this thing, but just wanted to graduate, which I did. But then started talking with some people at my job about this idea I had in school. They thought it was a cool idea. The more people we talked to, the more people wanted to hear about it. It's a big, long story, of course, but it became what is now known as being built as the Atlanta BeltLine. Atlanta was built by railroads. These railroads were built after the Civil War to expand the industrial base of the city. So this was the periphery of the city at the time, and built this industrial belt around the city, but then with white flight and suburbanization later in the 20th century, all of this territory was left behind. And by the time I was at Tech, the city had stabilized and was starting to grow, and this loop seemed like a logical place. Abandoned railroads like this in the High Line, or degraded urban waterways like the Los Angeles River, or obsolete roadways and other kinds of infrastructures. People sort of organically, just naturally, reimagining these corridors as sort of conduits for urban life and vitality and a different kind of future city. Since the beginning, the project came to life through this grassroots movement of people, and of course those were like friends and neighbors and people who were very much concerned about, they loved the idea, but they wanted to be able to stay and enjoy the benefits. And the problem is not the BeltLine. The problem is that is rising taxes and rents, and those are things that you can address pretty, it's not rocket science, So getting people to care, getting people to follow through on those investments and vote for candidates who advocate for those interests and for the people of the city, that's the difference. You don't hold communities down just to keep them affordable, right? You provide people with the opportunities. You just follow through with the policies and that are required to make sure that everybody benefits from them. The whole idea was to incentivize growth, to basically beg people to come to downtown and build something and live there. But now, obviously, everybody wants to be here, but we still have those old policies. Growth is coming whether we want it to or not. We can't stop it. The challenge is holding it to a higher standard. And that's about affordability, but it's also about like green building standards and resiliency, climate resiliency, and you have to want to do that. Like, we know what to do. There's lots of people who are experts in all of those fields. We know what to do. The problem is that we're not doing it. And that's leadership, right? And it's political leadership for sure, But it's also the business sector, it's also philanthropy. You know, there's a lot of people who are making those decisions and they could deliver better outcomes, but so far they're not. And so the question is, are we going to do it or not? The motivation to make all that happen is culture change, right? It's changing people's cultural expectations for what this town is capable of, for what its future looks like, for who the city is for, who's going to benefit, and we can do that. I'm still optimistic that we can get it right and rectify all those problems, but we have to want to do it. People who've been around for 20 years, they remember back when those were just basically abandoned buildings and underutilized land, and this was an old railroad that was covered with kudzu. That wasn't a good outcome either, But there's also a lot of new people. It's the BeltLine. My thesis was 21 years ago. There's a lot of people who weren't even alive then.
Myself included, right?
Right. So young people don't remember that. New people who have moved to the city since then don't remember that. And so their context is totally different, My kids think that Atlanta's the kind of place you can ride your bike to the grocery store. That's ridiculous from my perspective. But of course we can do it because we live on the BeltLine and there's 3 or 4 grocery stores down the way now. Right. When I started Georgia Tech, Atlanta was about 75% black. And today it's less than 50% black. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It's not only gentrification, that's a big part of it. It's also the suburbanization of the black middle class. It's all kinds of other things. And again, there are things that we can do to change that. We're just not doing it. The problem is much bigger than the BeltLine. The BeltLine didn't create all of our problems, and it can't solve all of our problems, right? I was never in a role of power on the BeltLine. I was never in a decision-making role, unfortunately. I think that those early days, that vision that we built, that grassroots movement, was really beautiful. It was the best version of Atlanta. It was a lot of different people advocating for a shared vision for their future that included everybody, and it was truly beautiful. What's happened is that we've lost that, it doesn't feel like that anymore. The region's going to grow by 2.5 million people over the next 20 years. That's like moving Charlotte to Atlanta in 20 years without doing anything about regional transportation. So if you think traffic is bad now, if you think gentrification is bad now, get ready, because it's only going to be amplified. Because the city has MARTA, it has walkable neighborhoods, it has a BeltLine and other things that the market is looking for. So it'll take a much larger share of growth than it has historically, and will probably at least double its population during that time frame, which is a tremendous amount of change. So you see all this change coming, and we need ideas for the future, but we're not listening to people with ideas. We're not listening to people with the ideas that we need, right? This is hard work, right? This is what Atlanta's going through, and what cities all across the country are going through right now is really a tremendous amount of change. It's not easy, and so it's hard work to get a lot of different people aligned on a similar set of goals, and to then follow through and implement those changes. So it's hard work. I think that we'll get there, but it's messy. It's not fun.
One neighborhood that is hopeful that the city can develop the right way is just starting to undergo major change: Grove Park. Located in the west side, Microsoft recently named Grove Park as the location for its 90-acre campus. This, in addition to Atlanta's newest and now largest park, the West Side Park, put all eyes on the small neighborhood for how development will look for itself and possibly for the rest of the West Side.
My name is Brandon Pierre Thomas, and I am the newly elected president of the Grove Park Neighborhood Association. When I look at Grove Park, or when I entered into Grove Park and started working in Grove Park before I moved there, it reminded me of where I grew up, which is Ninth Ward, New Orleans, which is a neighborhood that is very similar to Grove Park. It is family oriented, and there's a lot of community engagement. Some of the major concerns of the neighborhood association is this concept known as gentrification, right? But there's two pieces to gentrification. There's the good side of gentrification, and then there's what's known as the bad side of gentrification, which is typically the displacement. I see a lot of displacement happening. When I purchased my home, the very next year, my taxes doubled, right? And so for someone like me who can afford something like that, it's not as disastrous, but when you think of the effects that it will have or is having on my neighbors, whether they're renters or owners, it's something that's happening now, and it's something that's just like disastrous to the neighborhood.
In 2021, the Westside Equitable Task Force wrote to then Mayor Lance Bottoms to express their concerns.
The Westside Equitable Development Task Force, which is comprised of Almond Park, Summerhill, Howell Station, and Grove Park. We went back and forth about even sending the letter, but the letter was a boiling point or a tipping point based on our frustrations of the type of engagement that or the lack of engagement that we had been having with the city officials at that point. We thought it be prudent to have something in writing and something set forth that was sent to the city and that could be referenced at later points so that we could have it known that we've tried everything that we could and that this letter is a last-ditch effort. And if we did make it as plainly or as simple as possible before, here's this letter, and we're going to spell it out for you. I think it definitely sparked a lot of interest from other neighborhoods. It kind of informed a lot of neighbors. We've gotten a response from the mayor's office as it relates to addressing some of the concerns. And so it brought about change, but not the type of change that we want, but we think that it was a great first step. I think for me, my number one strategy is getting things on the record, right? And so in the interview in All Things Considered, I'm not sure if it was aired, but what I said was, I believe that interview, what one of our strategies would be to have people like news sources or people like neighboring communities band together with us in order to hold these developers publicly accountable for the promises that they've made on record. I think that the way Microsoft did it in terms of purchasing the property, and there were some hiccups in the beginning, but in terms of purchasing the property and then reaching out to the neighbors before coming up with massive plans, or so we're told, I think it's a very engaging way to go about it. I think that we refer at the neighborhood association to Microsoft as neighbors, right? Because ever since they've come out and made the public announcement, they've been acting very neighborly to include assisting in programs we have in the neighborhood association, to include assisting the foundation, assisting other organizations, getting neighborhood feedback or neighbors' feedbacks about the type of affordable / equitable housing that we want to see, because they promised about 25% affordable housing. And so we think that the way that they've decided to go about developing and engaging with the neighborhood is the appropriate way to do it so far. It's always difficult when you're giving something to the media, I'm sure, when you're doing certain things, it's always difficult to just give a number, right? Because once you give a number, then you're locked into that number. And so I think that 25% probably was the number that they had decided upon in the very beginning, but we're actually at the negotiating table as it relates to that 25% announcement as well. A mutually beneficial relationship is case in point where there's a conversation surrounding the Grove Park Recreational Center, right? And so one of the ideas that the neighbors have come to the association with is this idea that we would obviously reach out to the city, but then also reach out to Microsoft in an effort to build out this recreational center, which will provide wellness services. And theoretically, if Microsoft is coming to the neighborhood and they're bringing employees or whatever, that recreational center will serve not just the neighbors that are already in Grove Park, but the employees. As it stands right now, I'm optimistic about that level of gentrification, because it goes back to what I said before, is like oftentimes when we use this word gentrification, we start to clump it in with displacement. But gentrification has two components. It has the displacement aspect of the legacy residents or the longtime residents and things like that, but it also has the retrofitting of things that had often been overlooked and unseen for whiles. I personally don't see an issue with someone who sees an opportunity, I guess, to sell their home that they purchased prior to these developments because the houses are going up. What I really have an issue with is the idea that someone would sit on a home, cause that home to be blighted. So someone who would sit on their hand or purchase these properties for the purposes of sitting on their hands until development comes. People who are sort of predatory in their acts or predatory in their nature and how they deal with it.
Gentrification happens over a very long stretch of time. And if you continue to allow it to happen and if you don't stop it or get to it before it continues, you can literally just displace an entire group to the point that they're literally forgotten.
Most affordable housing developments in new developments involve this program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. It's a competitive program. It's hard to win the tax credits, which turn into essentially equity grants, and it's expensive to apply. If you're going to go through the work to develop a low-income housing tax credit unit building in a gentrifying neighborhood, I much rather have, let's say it's a 200-unit building. I much rather you get 200 affordable units out of that than 50 or 100. Because the market's going to generate hundreds. Now, if you're talking about developing in a neighborhood that's kind of declining, that kind of needs market rate units because it needs higher income people, it really has very few middle or high income people in the neighborhood, and you want to create some diversity both for retail and for other purposes, that's when mixed income developments make more sense to me. But in that neighborhood, given what's going on, it should be 100% affordable.
The state of Georgia doesn't allow rent control. So that's why Atlanta doesn't have rent control. So I know that there's been discussions in regards to looking at other formats and ways. There's an inclusionary zoning policy that we have now that is expected really to keep people from having to pay the increase in the tax that is occurring because of a new building, like say the Mercedes-Benz comes in, your tax increases. The inclusionary zoning is supposed to stave off some of that increase so that you don't get displaced. Some other policies that people are working on is redefining like affordability. What does affordability actually mean? It's kind of a word that we just throw around like affordable, but we don't really define it in an affordable way.
I think the only way we're going to have to do it, we're going to have to intentionally, maybe legally, enforce certain structures. And people have done this in cities around water, right? So the idea is make sure that we have a large range of demographics of people who live near the lake. You shouldn't just limit it to people who can afford it. Now, New York does, probably Detroit has recently engaged in this, Chicago has, but I think moving forward, we're going to have to make conscious efforts to fundamentally say we want this type of housing and we wanted to run the gamut, right? The social economic gamut without having developers decide, because that's normally the decision, right? You give them the contract, they build what they want to build, they set the prices where they want to set it. There's no oversight, so we just get what they get.
Finding ways of getting policies that protect individuals from the tax increases that are occurring in their area, that protect us from spending more than 30% of our income on our housing, that make sure that the average median income in our neighborhoods and the amount we're paying on rent coincide with each other.
You have to talk to people and have a sense of what their needs are, what their interests are, what their apprehensions are, and use that as a starting point to have conversations with developers. Development is tricky. We know that development is coming and those forces are moving and are hard to stop entirely. And so it's our job as a neighborhood and as residents who care about this city to make sure that it's a city for all of us, not just a city for those who are wealthy or affluent. We really have to go the extra mile, understand their grievances, their concerns, their frustrations, but also their dreams, their visions for community, and find ways to blend it all together. And I think that's the way that you grow not just a great, healthy community, but a sustainable one that we all can take pride in being a part of.
One of the big barriers to housing affordability in Atlanta is Atlanta's restrictive zoning codes, which largely don't allow for dense development. And when I say dense, I mean essentially compact. The idea is, with our fast swelling population, we need to find a way to actually place these people so not everybody's just like scrambling for like the next barely affordable residence. If we can reform the zoning code, which is something that's actually ongoing by the city's planning department, if we can reform the zoning code so that we can build taller or build tighter or, not prioritize cars. If you look from 10,000 feet, you might see just as many parking lots and parking decks as you do, multifamily buildings. So as soon as we can find a way to be more inviting, then we can fit more people. And then, one of our biggest hurdles is to boost the housing supply to fit the demand. Density helps there.
This isn't a force of nature. This is a force of economics. Our solution to gentrification, which I would say our solution to housing folks in a way that's affordable and getting folks off the street that have lost their housing, lies in our city's approach to how we develop.
We're going to have to be forthright and forthcoming with regard to saying government has a role to play. To your point, the neoliberal disposition is government stay out, right? Allow the market to fix the market, as if that exists without human beings. But the point has to be, it can't, because it's always looking at profit as the fundamental versus what you and I think are looking for, and that is, what is the greatest good? How do we satisfy a range of people's aspirations versus a very small particular group?
We are going to be in this fight until the end. We deserve to be here. We built this city, and we're not going to let anybody run us off this land.
We're going to work, and we're going to do policies, we're going to do rallies, we're going to do whatever we have to do.
The fact that we get to fight, it's in honor of our ancestors who couldn't say no, not without significant consequence. City Council could say, if you want to do business in the city of Atlanta, these are going to be the requirements. If the city cared about protecting its residents, I don't think developers really care, but they can be made to care, because the quid pro quo would be, you want to do business in Atlanta, then you're going to help us make sure that we can preserve our legacy residents because we, the city, value them. But the city is in partnership with these developers against the residents, and that's why we have no protection, and the developers, it's just open season. I hope that other communities will have the courage to stand up, because there aren't that many Peoplestowns left in Atlanta. This city has to figure out a new way of protecting its legacy residents while also inviting new people to move here. We should be able to coexist. We shouldn't have to be replaced and displaced.
We shall not be moved.